new phase of the search will have two elements. Firstly, there'll be mapping of the sea floor in that area, which is already underway, and a comprehensive search then of the sea floor once this mapping has been completed. The mapping of the ocean floor is currently engaging two vessels, the Chinese survey ship Suqian and an Australian contracted vessel, the Frugo Equator. These are in areas that have been identified by the ATSB. It'll take around 3 months to complete this mapping survey, but that gives crucial information about the nature of the seafloor terrain, which will make it possible to undertake the underwater search. I repeat that this area has never been comprehensively mapped previously, and so to put new equipment down into that area without having a clear knowledge of what the seafloor is like certainly risks the operation and the capacity of that equipment to operate safely. Now, we expect that the underwater search element will commence in August and take about 12 months to complete. In addition, the search effort will include equipment provided by Malaysia, which includes vessels fitted with search equipment, including towed sonar systems, which will be used to search the seafloor. A public request for tender has been issued, seeking a primary contractor to bring together and manage the expertise and the equipment and the vessels which will carry out the search. They will be directed by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau from the Operations Centre in Canberra. Now, can I emphasise again that this search is a major undertaking? We are optimistic that the capacity and the time that's now been available to more carefully scrutinise the information that's been available from the satellite and indeed other information at our disposal, that this site is the best available and most likely place where the aircraft is resting. The search will still be painstaking. Of course, we could be fortunate and find it in the first hour or the first day, but it could take another 12 months. We owe it to the passengers and the crew and everyone who's associated with MH370 to bring this mystery to a conclusion, and I can assure all of the families and those with an interest that Australia remains dedicated to the task of solving this greatest aviation mystery in global history. Now, I have with me Martin Dolan, and between us we'd be happy to try and answer questions. Yes.
Mr. Dolan, could I just ask you, since the whole business began, there's been a massive rumours and speculation that have filled a vacuum, I suppose, but also created enormous confusion about this. In the analysis that's now taken place of all the radar data and scientific, the satellite data and ever, can you just address two issues? One is the claim that the transponders in the aircraft must have been physically turned off by the pilots. Could that have actually happened as a result of an accident, a catastrophe like an explosion or something? And the other is the claim that the aircraft must have been under control and from the course it was taken, as indicated on radar records, and clearly tried to dodge radar.
Those are both matters for the Malaysian investigation which we are assisting. The focus of the ATSB has been on determining the flight path of the aircraft across the Indian Ocean so we can determine the most likely place that we will find it. So we know as a fact that the transponders after a certain time were not operating. It wasn't necessary for our purposes to determine why that was the case. Similarly, we have from secondary and primary radar the track of the aircraft for a considerable period of time, and we've taken that as facts to feed into our analysis. But the questions as to why this occurred are not ones that we needed to address in determining the search area, which has been our focus.
But it would be fair to comment that it is highly, highly likely that the aircraft was on autopilot. Otherwise, it could not have followed the orderly path that has been identified through the satellite sightings.
Certainly, for its path across the Indian Ocean, we are confident that the aircraft was operating on autopilot until it ran out of fuel.
And can you say anything about the idea of whether it tried to dodge radar? So it was under...
No,
was it ever at any stage under pilot control of some sort?
As I say, we haven't had to turn our minds to those questions, which are questions for the Malaysian investigation.
I'm from CCTV. As we know, the original search area also decided by the information from the satellites and the performance of aircraft and radar such as. Then, what's the reason that mislead you to the wrong place at the first stage?
Well, the original search area was identified on the basis as the best information available. As I mentioned earlier, we had earlier commenced searching further south, but on the basis of the information that was available at that time, there was a view that perhaps the aircraft may have entered the sea earlier than we had originally expected. Now, when that search began in that area, and once more we picked up some beeps, there was therefore really an expectation that that area was in fact correct. But as we've now had time to look more thoroughly at the data and do that at leisure and with the capacity to be able to analyse every item of information in great detail, we're satisfied now that the search would have been better located in the orange area that is identified on the map. So if we could have spent the time to actually do all the work that's been done now, we probably would have chosen the area that's identified now. But of course, when there was actually beeps picked up, that led everybody to want to concentrate their effort on the area where those beeps had actually been found.
Can you put this new search area in perspective? How far off the coast is this one compared to last time?
Well, it's a very long way. It's about 2,000 k's, isn't it?
Close to that, Minister. Duncan, have you got about 1,800 kilometres off the West Australian coast on average?
But our aerial search, when we were working in that area, did actually go further west than 1,800 kilometres. While they were concentrating on that arc, there was a view then that if there was any debris, it would have already drifted some distance. So the aerial search went further west than that. But it gets to the limit of the capability of the range of the aircraft that were involved in the search. This will be a search based on vessels, and so they'll have much less difficulty operating at that distance from the shore.
Truss, just to clarify, on the autopilot thing, are you saying that the plane was programmed, the autopilot was programmed to fly to where it crashed?
Well, maybe, Martin, you perhaps better answer that one.
The whole process of analysis has been an iterative one. So, based on the satellite data, there were theoretically an infinite range of flight paths the aircraft could have taken of all different sorts of shapes and changes of course. But to try and refine those, we had to make some provisional assumptions about the behaviour of the aircraft, which were then tested against the data and analysis. And the best fit, the highest probability flight path is one that has it on a straight course, and the sort of straight course will be associated with the aircraft being operating on autopilot. So by an iterative process, we have concluded it was on autopilot, just as we can conclude that at the 7th arc it ran out of fuel. So it's...
Do you have any indication of when that course might have been set?
The assumption is that for crossing each of the 7 arcs that we have from the satellite, that the aircraft was on a straight track. For all of that period across the Indian Ocean, it was largely... We're confident it was on a straight track and therefore on autopilot.
Sorry, just to clarify, given the curvature of the Earth and whatever, is that a straight line we're seeing, that curve?
That curve represents a calculation from the satellite that's over the equator and the signal that goes from a ground station through the satellite to the aircraft and back. So it is very simply distance from a satellite. The curve of... so it's...
The aircraft was flying straight?
The aircraft, by our assessment, was flying straight. If you look at our more detailed report, you'll see there are 7 arcs that we're looking at, and we're saying the path the aircraft took to intersect each of those arcs was a straight path.
Yes. Out of the sort of, if you boil down the infinite number of combinations to say 1,000 perhaps, out of that 1,000, how many of them fall in your orange zone, which might give us an indication of what the probability is of finding the orange, and then do all 1,000 fall in the blue zone? And as in a separate question, when you say a straight track, are most of your solutions consistent with a magnetic heading, or are they more consistent with waypoints being entered so that this would be more of a question of great circle routes, which you could argue is straight relative to the Earth's surface? Are they straight as magnetic headings or as great circle? So two questions.
Well, the answer, Mr. Bradshaw, is that when we say straight, we do mean great circle, so straight in relation to a flat map of the Earth's surface, but a great circle across the globe. The second is there are a range of possibilities. It could be heading, it could be track, it could be indeed navigation to waypoint. What we do know is the highest probability tracks by 5 different analyses all end up, the highest probability ones, in the orange zone. But if you wanted to exclude all possibilities, then you have to include a much wider zone. We're saying the highest probability, and all 5 highest probabilities are in that orange zone.
If I can just clarify this gentleman's question. I think he is asking, and I'm not sure whether I heard the answer, whether this idea that the plane was on autopilot means that it was set on autopilot at the point where your team, started looking at the analysis. In other words, at the point when the plane started to head south into the Indian Ocean. I think, is that his question?
If that's the question, then the answer is, for our purposes, what we know is for the 7 arcs, so from the first arc to the 7th arc, the behaviour of the aircraft as we have assessed it was consistent with it being on autopilot for that period. And that's the basis of the analysis.
But we couldn't accurately, and nor have we attempted to, fix the moment when it was put on autopilot. We know it was on autopilot during this critical phase of our tracking, but it will be a matter for the Malaysian-based investigation to look at precisely when it may have been put on autopilot.
Just geographically then, at what point did you assess that it was on autopilot, like north of Australia or off Malaysia?
Our assumption is the aircraft turned somewhere west of the tip of Sumatra.
And then it was on autopilot.
And past that point, what we're saying with confidence is from the first arc, which is a little further away than that, to the 7th arc, Great Circle track, after the second of those data points to the 7th is when it's on straight track and autopilot.
Excuse me, ignorance, but does a pilot need to have a target when he's selecting a course for an autopilot? Like, there's obviously nothing would be programmed into an autopilot that would take an aircraft on that course.
You can put the aircraft onto a magnetic heading, you can put it onto a defined track over a point and continuing, you can put it to a waypoint. There are a range of ways of navigating an aircraft and entering information into the flight computer which informs the autopilot and directs the aircraft.
Or you can lock it directly on its current path.
Yes.
The lady at the back, yeah.
Clarify the next stage search, because the 2 survey ships obviously wouldn't be able to finish their job, or will they finish their job before August? And after August, when you contract maybe a commercial underwater search vehicle, but what's the next, and what's the capacity of that future vehicle? How many square kilometers will they cover for a day or for a month?
The answer to the first of those questions is that we will be progressively mapping, and it will take us at least 3 months. That started a week or 2 ago. So it won't be completed, the mapping will not be completed at the time the search commences, but we will have sufficient mapping for the search to begin and for the subsurface search to be carried out safely and appropriately.
Mr. Truss, there has been a report that...
Sorry, there was a second part to that question. And what we are seeking sufficient capability through our tender process to ensure that the search is completed within a year.
Mr. Truss, there has been a report that the investigators have discovered that the pilot simulator had flown this course across the Indian Ocean. Have you been informed of that by the Malaysians?
Look, again, I don't really want to comment on areas which will probably be the responsibility of Malaysia in its investigation, although I've heard a number of reports about the pilot simulator, some saying it hasn't been active for a year, some saying it had certain mapping and so forth on it, but I can't confirm whether that's accurate or not, and it's not really relevant to us in seeking to find the aircraft.
Would the Malaysians keep you up to date with that type of information?
Well, there's regular meetings occurring between Martin and his counterparts in Malaysia and others associated with the search, and they will continue. There's another group of them next week to talk about various aspects of the ongoing search. There's a high degree of cooperation between not just Australia and Malaysia, but many of our other partners and countries that have a particular interest in this search operation, and we try and keep in regular contact. Would you like to add anything, Martin? Or is that...
The only thing, Deputy Prime Minister, is that the ATSB is confident that it's had access to all the data necessary to define the search area appropriately.
And given what you've, given that that has not yet been properly mapped, what's your understanding, though, from going over the area earlier of the sort of undersea terrain? What sort of range of depths are there, gullies and ridges?
We're starting the bathymetric work. There's some very broad area mapping available, which you can see from that map there. The general trend towards Broken Ridge is rising and reasonably smooth, but we don't know the detailed topography below that. It may have unevenness, that's what we need to find out, but as it heads south towards Broken Ridge, then it becomes much more challenging terrain in terms of the unevenness. So there's a mix of...
This is Broken Ridge, goes through there, and it rises up relatively gently, as I understand it, to Broken Ridge, and then it falls away abruptly. But there's a trench through there as well, and who knows how deep that is.
All right, we're listening to Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss and Martin Dolan, the ATSB chief, give us an update on the refined search area for MH370 more than 3 months after the plane went missing. They're telling us this search area is further south than when they searched before. It will take 12 months to map an area of the southern Indian Ocean which has never been mapped before. They confirmed that it was likely this plane was on autopilot as it moved south there over the southern Indian Ocean. They also mentioned that the beeps that the Bluefin 21 submersible was tracing for weeks was a distraction, and that they did have the correct area, but now they just need to refine the search based on specialists who've made calculations based on satellite information. If you're watching this in the United States, we'll have updates on this story throughout the day. Regular programming on CNN US continues in moments. For those of you watching around the world, I'm Errol Barnett at CNN Centre, and I'll have more on this breaking story after this short break.